The sun was a heavy gold burning above the plain, and dust lifted from the earth in little storms that curled and vanished as if they were memories dissolving in the wind. A man rode slow along that road, rein slack in his hand, hat pulled low against the blaze. His name was Luke, 32 years etched across his skin like old trails across a map. His boots were scuffed, his shirt patched at the elbow, but the greater wear was in his eyes. They carried the look of someone who had seen too much leaving, too much sorrow, and not enough places that ever asked him to stay. He was a cowboy by trade, but more so by fate, a soul tethered to motion, carrying silence the way others carried luggage. It was the smallest sound that pulled him from his thoughts, the brittle cry of a child, carried thin on the hot air. He slowed his horse and turned his head, and there she was, standing by the split fence that leaned toward the earth as if tired of holding itself upright. Barefoot, hair tangled by sun and wind, no more than 6 years of age, a girl looked up at him with eyes far older than her years. She said nothing at first, only lifted her hand, palm open. And then she spoke in a voice that seemed too soft to survive the hard world around them. "No more pain," she whispered. "Let's go home." The words struck him with more force than a bullet ever could. A child's plea, unornamented, uncalculated, honest as the air. He dismounted slow, boots sinking in dust, and crouched before her. She did not step back. Instead she reached her small hand into his calloused one, as if she had been waiting for him to arrive all her short life. He asked her name, and she answered, "M.I.A." He asked where home was, and she turned, tugging his hand toward the leaning cabin beyond the field. The place looked less like a home than a memory of one. Roof sagging, boards weather-worn, porch half-collapsed, the cabin bore the scars of wind and neglect. A faint curl of smoke drifted from its crooked chimney, but even that seemed more a sigh than a sign of life. M.I.A. pulled him up the steps, through the half-open door, into dimness that smelled of hunger and damp earth. Inside, a woman stood frozen, her hands braced on the back of a chair, as if steadying herself against the sight of a stranger. She was young, 28, perhaps, but hardship had drawn shadows beneath her eyes, and thinness had hollowed her cheeks. Yet she held a dignity in the way she squared her shoulders, the way she shielded the small boy clutching her skirts. Her name, Luke would learn, was Lucy, and the boy was Leo, 4 years old and wide-eyed with hunger. Lucy's first words were not welcome. "We don't need charity," she said, her voice sharp, though it wavered under strain. She kept her eyes on Luke, wary, ready to resist whatever he represented. The little boy clung tighter, and M.I.A. hurried to her mother's side, tugging her arm. "Mama," he came. "I told you someone would." Luke did not defend himself, nor did he argue. He only set his hat against his chest and nodded slightly, as if to say he had no right to disturb their fortress of suffering, yet could not walk away. He glanced around the one-room cabin, thin blankets, an empty pot, a chair with one leg braced by stone. There was almost nothing, save the 3 souls who had been forced to call it enough. Lucy's suspicion held steady. "You've wasted your time, cowboy. We don't need saving." Luke met her eyes then, steady, quiet. "Maybe not," he said. "But I reckon everyone needs a little less pain." The words were simple, yet they struck the room with weight. He set his saddle down in the corner without asking permission, rolled up his sleeves, and stepped outside again. They watched him through the window as he lifted an axe resting by the porch, its handle cracked, blade dull. He tested it against a log, sharpened it with the stone he carried, and began to split wood with the steady rhythm of someone who had known long days of labor. Each strike was measured, patient. By the time he returned, shoulders damp with sweat, arms ringed with dust, he carried a bundle of firewood. He set it gently by the hearth. The boy, Leo, looked at the wood as if it were gold. Lucy said nothing, though her throat moved with words she did not release. That evening, what little meal they had was shared. Thin broth, a scrap of cornbread, steam rising faintly in the lantern's glow. Luke accepted his portion without complaint. When Leo hesitated, staring at his own bowl as though ashamed of its smallness, Luke slid half of his portion across to the boy. "I ate earlier," he lied, though his stomach tightened with emptiness. Leo's eyes shone, and he devoured the food. Lucy watched with a gaze that softened despite herself. She still spoke with resistance. "You're not here to save us." Luke swallowed his broth slow, met her gaze. Didn't say I was. Just reckon I can carry a little of what's weighing you down. It was not the words, but the way he spoke them, steady and unadorned, that made her falter. She turned her face away, busying her hands with the boy's ball, though a faint tremor crossed her lips. The days that followed unfolded with a strange, quiet rhythm. Luke repaired the cabin's broken hinges, patched holes in the roof, mended the fence with nails he bought it for in town. He rose early, chopped wood, fetched water, and never asked for more than a corner of floor to sleep on. The children began to follow him like shadows. Leo clambered onto his shoulders, giggling as Luke carried him high. Mia brought him wildflowers, pressing them into his rough hands with solemn ceremony. Their laughter filled corners of the cabin where silence had lived too long. Lucy stitched his torn shirt one afternoon, her fingers moving deftly though her eyes did not rise from the fabric. When she handed it back, their fingers brushed. Neither spoke, yet something passed between them, delicate as a bird's wing beat. But the world outside their cabin was not blind. In town, whispers spread. The widow, they said, had found herself a drifter to warm her bed. Men sneered, women shook their heads. When Luke bought flour and sugar with his own money, the shopkeeper muttered, "Charity has a way of turning sour." Luke heard it all, and said nothing. He bore the gossip the way he bore saddle sores, with quiet endurance. Lucy, however, felt the sting. One evening she confronted him, her voice brittle. "Do you think I don't hear them? Do you think I don't know what they say, that I'm a burden you've decided to pity?" Her eyes flashed with humiliation. Luke straightened slowly from where he had been oiling his saddle. He studied her, long enough that the silence became unbearable. At last he said, "If pity was all I carried, I'd have left long ago. I stay because when I step into this cabin, it feels like the first road that doesn't lead me away from myself." Her breath caught. For a moment, the walls between them cracked. But old wounds ran deep, and she shook her head. Men always say things when it's easy. They leave when it's hard. Luke looked at her with a grief that came not from her words, but from the truth they carried. "Maybe. But I've been running long enough. I don't aim to leave." The conversation left them raw, yet it planted something neither could uproot. Then the storm came. Clouds gathered black across the noon sky, winds tearing dust into whirlwinds. Rain fell in hard sheets, hammering the roof until water leaked through every seam. The cabin shook with thunder. Lucy clutched the children close, but it was Luke who climbed the beams, who pressed boards against the leaks, who worked with furious strength to keep the storm at bay. Soaked to the bone, hair plastered against his brow, he fought until the worst had passed. When at last the storm broke, and silence settled heavy but calm, Luke found Lucy by the hearth. Her shoulders were shaking, though she tried to hide it. He stepped near, slow, not to startle her. She lifted her face, tears streaking her cheeks, eyes bright with something between fear and hope. He dropped to one knee, not with rehearsed grandeur, but with the weight of truth pressing him down. His voice was hoarse, rough with everything he had carried. "Lucy, no more running. No more pain. I want to stay. Not as a guest. As yours. If you'll have me." The words lingered, heavy in the air. She did not answer at once. Silence stretched long enough that he feared he had broken what fragile bond they had built. But then she reached, slow, trembling, and laid her hand into his. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, but sure. "Then stay, Luke. Stay." He fumbled at his pocket, brought forth a small ring, worn smooth with age. "It was my mother's," he said. "Carried it all these years. Never found the right place to lay it down. Until now." Her lips parted in wonder, her breath shivering. She let him slip the ring upon her finger. And in that moment, something shifted, not just between them, but in the air itself. The children stirred, rubbed their eyes, and when they saw their mother's hand clasped in Luke's, they smiled, as if they had always known this was how the story would turn. The next morning, they walked into town together. Luke with Lucy's hand in his, Mia and Leo close at their sides. The townsfolk stared, whispered, but this time Lucy did not lower her gaze. She walked tall, dignity reclaimed, as Luke introduced them not as charity, but as his family to be. In days to come, the cabin changed. Boards straightened, windows cleared. The sound of laughter replaced the hush of despair. And Luke, once a man adrift, found himself anchored not by chains but by love freely given. Years later, he would recall that day when a small barefoot girl reached for his hand and whispered, "No more pain." He would smile, for she had been right. It was the day he finally found home. And if you, weary traveler, find yourself wandering roads heavy with dust and silence, remember this: salvation rarely arrives in thunder or triumph. Sometimes it comes in the fragile hand of a child, in the quiet courage of a woman who dares to trust again, in the simple word that ends all running: home.